Why, hello everyone. How's it going? Welcome to my Substack Live. I am also streaming on X and YouTube. Uh, but I should note that I'm only monitoring the comments on Substack Live. So if you want me to see your comments and react to them, then you'll have to watch me through Substack Live. Well, hi. Um, I did a Substack Live the other day, and we walked through what I kind of see as the sort of the high level dynamic of where we are on the other side of the political violence that this country experienced last week. I wrote a piece last night and published it on the issue of cancel culture and my own sort of meditation about its sort of effect on our culture, and not just from the perspective that cancel culture is like wrong in a moral sense, but how it potentially disarms us of the necessary tools of persuasion that moral and democratic change requires. And that's what I wanted to talk about today. This idea of moral progress, like what does that even mean? Some philosophers argue that it doesn't even exist. That that Martin Luther King's insight that ultimately our like a history bends towards justice is an illusion. I don't believe that. Um, I believe that moral progress has happened, is possible, that it's desirable, and that and that morality as something that we understand in a social context is something that evolves over time. It is not something that stays constant. Our understanding of morality is affected by our technological landscape, our cultural landscape, our ecological landscape. There are, morality is like ultimately about like our sense of right and wrong, right? And those moral judgments we make against moral categories um, are dependent on all of these like we can maybe we'll get into some of these thought experiments at some point to sort of demonstrate how the idea that objective morality can exist is actually like a fool's errand. I'm quite critical of this perspective that people have that there exists an objective morality. Not because like I'm like a hyper relativist on reality. I don't think the argument isn't that anything goes. I think there are things that we're trying to organize around the idea that human dignity is non-negotiable, that that humans should govern themselves according to their own values. Like these are my sort of like kind of core commitments. What I sometimes say my liberal commitments. My summum bonum, right? The highest goods that I try to direct myself towards. Um, and ultimately distilling that into political morality and sort of and social and cultural uh, mor- uh you know like like manifestations um is is something that can only be done right uh through like a healthy political culture. So I want to talk about that. I want to talk about moral progress. And like and why cancel culture is not a tactically wise way to go about trying to bring moral progress. I think that I think that and we can talk about some other aspects of this as well, that I think are worth thinking about, right? This is the tendency of humans to do, like, moral accounting or karmic accounting, however you want to put it, right? That we sort of think, this sort of tendency to sort of think about all of us having a moral bank account, that we credit and debit to. Um, so let's maybe let's like start there. Let's think about that, right? Right? Like, are you a good person? Are you a good person? Do you think you're a good person? I mean, I think we all tend to think of ourselves as good persons, but it's generally something that we think is worrying, in someone's psychology, from a mental health perspective, if they think themselves a bad person. That we talk about this, having sort of the cognitive architecture of like self-respect and self-love. Um, so that kind of ladders up to that notion, right? That we think of ourselves as good people. And you should think of yourself as a good person. I think most people are good people, even if they are, deluding themselves in terms of the uh, uh, the way that they go about trying to bring good into the world. That's not the same thing as saying that everyone's good, like from any like particular frame of reference. It's just trying to step inside the psychological reality of human beings, and recognizing that that's actually the landscape, right? Of where argument and persuasion plays a role in, advancing us towards this notion of moral progress. Um, my criticism of cancel culture turns not on my sort of disapprobation for the idea that somebody who expresses a racist, sexist, bigoted view is somehow like undeserving of public scorn or social ostracism. These are actually things that are sometimes highly appropriate, right? I mean, sometimes social ostracism is appropriate. Sometimes public scorn is appropriate, right? This is one of the ways that we communicate moral signals in the culture. But the question then comes is like, when is it, when to deploy that tool, right? Um, and I think the question ultimately turns on, like, what is it that you're trying to accomplish, right? If you're trying to bring about social change, I think what you want to have happen is that you change the minds of a sufficient number of people, that their morals and values, um, become part of the fabric of the culture, such that sort of establishing sort of a new community standard for what is right and what is wrong. Like that seems like, like at an abstract level, that seems to me to be what you want to do, right? To bring about positive social change. So on the question of like cancel culture and using it as a primary tool, one has to then ask, does engaging in persuasion through those methods lead to lasting social and cultural change? My argument is no, it doesn't, because it feeds into polarization and oppositional politics. It creates siege mentalities, and reinforces a whole bunch of problematic um social structures. What pushes people into what epistemologists call like epistemic closure, and or what is sometimes or what might even sometimes be referred to in the social media context as filter bubbles. These sort of online mirrors, funhouse mirrors that Sam Harris refers to them as, um, that reflect a distorted view of the world back to us based on the things that we want to be angry about, the the intuitions that we want to have confirmed. This radicalization bubble that we put ourselves into through this toxic social media environment that now dominates our information landscape. So my contention isn't that cancel culture is immoral. My contention is that cancel culture doesn't work. That it's sort of akin to like not exercising, like getting weaker, not working the muscles, um, and then requiring quite a bit of physical exertion when an emergency comes, and not having those capacities available to you. So when an activist, a political activist, um, takes the position that this thing that I'm advocating for is something that I shouldn't even have to be arguing about. I mean, that's like all. That is like in a sense like a very vapid observation, right? Like Martin Luther King ought not had to argue for his own dignity. Like we can all agree with that, right? Yet he did. He did argue for his dignity to be respected. And he did so not just for himself, but um, for all of the oppressed people that he represented. So there's a sort of petulance to that position that I shouldn't have to argue for my rights. Like, okay, like I mean, I, there's a whole bunch of like I shouldn't have to starve. I shouldn't have to fear for my life. I shouldn't have to do all of these things. Yet I might have to protect myself from threats that should not be there, right? This is a petulant. I don't say petulant in a sense to sort of like demean people, or sort of minimize the thrust or the salience of their moral cause, but to impress upon you that from the perspective of sort of just the reality in which we inhibit, like we face unfairness all the time, and there always comes a choice before us, right? Which is like, how do we meet that unfairness? Like it wasn't fair that that Europeans in the early 20th century had to fight back against the Nazis to secure their freedom. There was nothing fair about being invaded by another country, but you have to fight back when that happens, right? So when a political activist takes the position that I shouldn't have to do this, that this is tiring, that like you should educate yourself, or like I don't want to hear the opinions of anybody that don't have that I don't believe occupy a subject position that would give them the necessary insight to understand what I'm saying, and I therefore dismiss them out of hand. This is not like dangerous to me, or it's not so much as it's dangerous to society, which, well, it is dangerous to society, but it's also dangerous to them. They're denying themselves a really important set of tools that they can use to change the world in a positive way, which is learning how to, through pro-social means, change people's minds, to turn them towards their better angels, as Abraham Lincoln wanted us all to do. Like this is a psychological orientation. It's a way of like viewing the world around you, right? It's a way of switching a mode of thinking, of looking out into the world and saying, who are my potential enemies? And instead asking the question, who are my potential allies? But we get really confused in this endeavor because we do this thing that I call moral accounting. And it, in, fa- and it, and I do have to say that this is a problem that is largely of the left, this moral accounting problem. And it's difficult to talk about because it gets into arguments about whitewashing history, uh, about the risk of hagiography, of past of historical figures. Like a great example being like the fact that like Thomas Jefferson owned slaves. He inherited slaves through his family. But it's also a contradiction that he wrestled with and didn't feel good about. And this is like an example of like of where sort of the moral accounting game can become, I think, like quite dangerous and destructive to the project of moral progress, right? Because if you look at, say, someone like Thomas Jefferson, you situate him in history, and you consider what the man did from where his life began and where it ended. I mean, this was a morally conflicted man, right? Who was struggling with his own internal contradictions. But in that internal struggle, um, ultimately helped popularize a political philosophy that would become the bedrock for eliminating slavery. It become the bedrock for the arguments that would sustain the women's suffrage movement and the civil rights movement, um, sexual liberation. Eh, so it's very important that we recognize this tendency in ourselves to project an objective moral standard across history, and even not just long-term history, but our own history, right? So, I mean, I I was once younger, and foolish, as young people are, and so the question would be like, when if I let's say, this isn't an admission, this is just an example, um that you were to find my high school yearbook from ninth grade, and find that I'd written something racist or sexist or bigoted in it. What would that say about me right now? Would that matter? Would you ask me to cancel myself and stop doing what I'm doing right now? And if the answer to that is like yes, like I'm then I would say that like you don't believe in moral progress. You don't, because like to believe in moral progress is to believe that people can change their minds, that they can become more morally enlightened over time. And the question is, do we condemn people for their past ignorance, or do we celebrate them for their present enlightenment? I mean, it's a psychological frame. Like, how do you want to show up and view the world around you? I mean, I prefer to celebrate people for their present enlightenment. If somebody was a white supremacist in their teens and today they're a progressive activist in their 30s, like that's something to celebrate. That's not that's not somebody to say you haven't properly atoned for your sins. That's doing something that is sometimes referred to by, you know, social psychologists as sort of permission structures, or the removal of permission structures. There, humans respond to incentives, as economists like to talk about all the time. We do. And so you have to think about the landscape of somebody who might recognize in themselves, um, you know, something about themselves that they don't feel comfortable with. Maybe they look in the mirror and maybe they think, maybe I am a little bit racist. Maybe I shouldn't be saying, maybe I should be kind of pushing back on my family members and the things that they're saying about trans people. I've said some of these things myself, and maybe I posted them online. But like somebody like that who's sort of struggling with sort of feeling like maybe there's a there there's something wrong with the way that they're comporting themselves, and they look out into the land, and they look out into the ether, they look out into this social media landscape that we have, and they say to themselves, well, I'm condemned forever because I tweeted this anti-trans thing 3 years ago. And that's gonna basically hang over me, and nobody like in that, part of the political landscape is ever gonna welcome me. I'm just gonna have to admit that I'm a bad person for the rest of my life. That removes the permission structure for change. So I think every changed mind is a cause to be celebrated. Somebody's past ignorance is not a moral sin to be reckoned with. This is very important. This is very important. You can think about this in sort of a, in a political philosophy sense of trying to make sure that your political disposition is one of addition and not subtraction. That you have a sense of core values that you want to advance into the world, and positive change that you want to see come about. And so your goal is to create, your goal ultimately is to turn those political goals into political power in a democratic way, obviously, through building the largest possible coalition that you can. And the reality is, and this has always been the reality, is that's going to involve having imperfect allies, right? Um, and if you're not willing to have imperfect allies, then you're you're fighting with two hands tied behind your back, because we need allies. Freedom needs allies. And all of us are not, you know, we're not wired to pay attention to everything, right? This is the other thing too. I get comments at Notes from the Circus sometimes less frequently now, but more frequently months ago, of people who were just coming at me all the time for the fact that I wasn't writing about the Israel Gaza situation more frequently. And not because and I have written about it a few times, and I've given some moral commentary on that situation, but I am principally focused unapologetically on the health of American democracy. I there's only 24 hours in a day, and I sleep for 8 or 9 of them, and I need to make decisions about what I pay attention to. I'm not ignorant of the fact that American foreign policy is at issue there. However, I am I am to a sort of an overriding sort of sense of I guess you could say devotion to maintaining what I call democratic possibility, right? That there is a space, that there's a space within our political culture and our political institutions, that the collective will of the people um, can legitimately steer our collective self-governance, that possibility continue to exist. I think that that's something I mean, I consider that to be the most important thing to focus on, because there's a limit. I mean, I like for I'll I think it's I mean, I think this country is committing war crimes right now, right? I think blowing up these alleged drug smuggler boats from Venezuela in international waters is insane. I I mean, I think that, like, we should. I mean, if I'm thinking off the cuff about something like that, that's the kind of thing that I think that, like, that we should be putting members of our government, like, before the International Criminal Court in The Hague over. I mean, this is insane. Um, but, like, yet I haven't written about that. As morally outrageous as it is, I'm focused on our political culture and maintaining democratic possibility. But does that say something but that doesn't say anything about my morality. My The fact that I'm not talking about this or I'm not talking about that. I have limited attention. We all have limited attention. And if we start policing each other and doing this moral accounting based on whether or not we're paying attention to the correct things at the correct times, um, we're really morally confusing ourselves about, like, who our allies and enemies are. So this is really important for people to think about in this moment. Um, and this obviously applies sort of more generally to um, a lot of people out there who aren't really paying attention at all, right? They're focused on they're getting more scared in this economy. Grocery prices are going up again. Uh, people have kids, and they need to pay for their kids' food and their school and their health care, and people just don't have the time on their hands to to stay up to date on everything that's going on. And and honestly, like, it's hard to stay up to date with what's going on because the ways in which we now stay up to date with what's going on are so mentally unhealthy for us. These dangerous social media algorithms that we need to do something about as a society. um it's like, I can understand why people unplug, and I can't, like, condemn them for their ignorance. I do think, like, simultaneously, I think that a responsible citizenry is an educated one, and one that that does do its best to understand the issues and to participate in their democracy. Uh, I mean that's necessary, and the ruling class that we now have, this increasingly fascistized right wing in this country, would very much like that not to happen. They want to keep you distracted. They want you to be angry about Charlie Kirk. They want you to be angry at leftist excess. They want you to be angry at crime. Um, I mean, not that these things are like. I mean, the assassination of Charlie Kirk is indefensible. Political violence is never acceptable. It's incompatible with democracy. But like but they are using it. They're now using that as a form of political propaganda to shut down debate, and that's not okay, right? Uh, and that is unfortunately the sort of the tried and true tactic of of reactionary politics, of fascist politics. Um, those of you who know history and our political history in particular, and the history of the rise of the Nazi Party in Germany in the late Weimar Republic, will be familiar with the Reichstag fire. The Reichstag being the legislature um, in the Weimar Republic, um, that was allegedly set ablaze by a man who was associated with the Bolsheviks, communists, the movement that led to the revolution in the Soviet Union and in Russia. And that was in fact like one of the ways in which the Nazis were able to get liberals and moderates to sort of temper their opposition and actually you know sort of agree to work with Hitler, um, because there was this fear that Germany could face a people's revolution, not unlike what had happened in Russia, and that fear was used to keep moderates in the late Weimar Republic from protesting too loudly, because there was this fear it could play into the hands of the far left. And it does have to be said that this is the same sort of dynamic that we're seeing today, right? I have a lot of centrist friends that say things to me like, "Mike, like I agree with you on Trump, but if Mamdani wins in New York, like both sides are just as bad." Right? It's this I mean this fecklessness, the centrists who are allowing themselves to be confused into this notion that um that there exists this like existential threat on both sides, and that you know I mean the fear generally. I mean, I know some of these people. I mean, like some of these people are, my friends are quite wealthy people in New York City, and you know they're not MAGA people. They're centrists. Uh, but yeah, I mean they're like, look, I mean, they think if Mamdani becomes mayor of New York, they think that becomes sort of the center of the of the Democratic Party, and in their minds, right, that puts you on this path that looks something like, Ayn Rand's dystopia of like Atlas Shrugged, where where you know the Mamdani's like government run grocery stores in Manhattan are going to like fail, and that failure will just cause them to like double down more on like destroying capitalism even more, and before they know it, the whole country will be in ashes. It's this, yeah. I mean, it's a and and so the right is able to exploit this, and is cowing these people into essentially this strategic neutrality. Um, so yeah, I mean, what that I mean, I'm at this point, like, I think, yeah, I mean, I think the center is dead, for all intents and purposes. Um, that isn't to say that, I mean, like, that radicalism, is what's on tap. But I do think that if we are coming out of this, it's there it is going to need to be something that is more populist than sort of the establishmentarian sort of approach that the Democratic Party has taken up until now. I touched a little bit on that in the last Substack Live, in terms of the disconnection that people feel from politics, and this is where I think, you see James Tallarico out of Texas. um, I think is an example of that kind of, populist politics, that is ripe, to take hold. But here's the thing: as the economy gets worse, and it will, and as the corruption deepens in Washington, as it will, and we see more political violence, which we almost, unfortunately, I'm not obviously, we need to condemn it universally, but I think it's fair to say that that we're in a season of political violence, and it's and I assume there's going to be tit for tat. Um, I'm saying that as a prediction, not. I mean, not, and I'm really worried that that's going to ultimately play into the hands of these people who are trying to end our democracy. People need to understand, that political violence simply um helps fascism. It doesn't, like, that's why the German, that's what the Reichstag fire was. It was the Germans were, the Nazis were exploiting, uh well, I mean, they were exploited they were exploiting political violence, to justify, an end to political opposition. So we're in a really, like, tough place, because let's be clear, like, Donald Trump wants more political violence. He wants it. He wants a justification to invoke the Insurrection Act. Um, and to, he want, like like, these people are terrified, of the voters. They know that, like, in a free and fair election next year, they're going to be in this. They know that the economy is getting worse. They know their immigration policies have actually become very unpopular now. Americans do not like what they're seeing, from ICE, and so they're going to do everything they can to stay in power. And one of the things that authoritarians do, right, is they try to foment conflict, and then they try to get everyone to focus on that conflict, to sow division. It's divide and conquer. And so, yeah, I mean, the thing is as much as like the right, as much as like Stephen Miller, is, um like, they want to provoke the left, or radicals on the, they want to provoke. I mean, there's various social scientists, and and political scientists will tell you, right? I think it's like maybe like 4% of the population, like, typically is sort of like susceptible to, being sort of pushed into political violence. in any like in any sort of like population. But 4%, out of 300, and, four or nearly 400 million people, is a lot of people. And it's very clear to me that the political right wants to provoke that minority of our population into doing things that they can then use to bring an end to our democracy. So it really is important that the political left, or at least the organized political left, that is organizing in opposition to this, never allow them, like they never allow themselves to be pushed into a position of defending that, uh or allowing themselves to be like associated with it. Like so that is something that has to be remembered, because the thing about fascism and reactionary politics is it works by, I mean, the main sort of psychological trick that fascist politics relies on is the fact that it controls and sets the conversation, that it always keeps its opposition on the defensive, that it sets like that Donald Trump is the one deciding what we talk about, right? I mean, the Epstein files were like an example, I think, for like the first time of sort of of Donald Trump's ability to set the conversation breaking down. Like he's wanted to change that topic, and has failed to do so. Or maybe he's succeeding more now as people tire of the Epstein scandal. This is how the reactionary right works. And this needs to be deeply understood by political actors on the left, is that you can't fall for that, right? Um, you need to kind of be on the offense. You need to be pointing your finger at them and saying, "I see you. I see that you're corrupt. I see that you're doing these criminal things. Um, I- you know, I see, I see the corruption. I see Tim Cook bringing a 24 karat gold bar as like a tribute to Donald Trump in the Oval Office, this gold adorned Oval Office, this gaudy, disgusting insult to the people's house, the White House. And you need to like stay there, and you need to keep pointing that finger, and not allowing yourself to get drawn into the conversation that the reactionary right wants you to have. Um, so even the fact that we're having a conversation around political like we actually, like, if I were to, like, if I could wave a magic wand, I would actually say at this point that most left wing or anti, like, authoritarian commentators should have moved past their denunciations of political violence unequivocally, and should now be returning to a fully offensive message, which is that we see your corruption, we see your lies, we see your criminality, um, and like we're not diverting our gaze from this vulgar display, from this absolute betrayal of our historical, cultural, and political inheritance that is a self-governing republic. We see you trying to destroy it, and we will not be like, we're not getting into the mud with you on every single, like, explosive, like, attempt at reaction. And this is why I think, I mean, we need to, like, delegitimize social media, as a way of understanding our world. Um, I mean, I'm not, I'm not like I don't want to like I'm not a fan of like Spencer Cox's politics, but um, I am deeply grateful that there's somebody on the right now who's sort of doubling down on this notion that these, you know, m- you know, $1 trillion plus market capitalization companies that run these algorithms are they're morally and ethically culpable for uh, bringing us to this moment. I mean, our democracies in the West are dying in no small part due to social media, due in no small part uh, to X, nay Twitter, uh, Facebook, Meta, Instagram, TikTok, which by the way was banned uh, um, in a bipartisan bill upheld in a Supreme Court ruling earlier this year. Donald Trump's not complying with that law because TikTok is controlled by the Chinese. So we need this needs to become, I think, a central part of the political conversation. Um, the role of social media in our democratic decline. Um, it's not that any of these social media companies set out to destroy our democracy, but it was one of the side effects of these products. No, like I don't know anybody. I don't know anybody who has been made happier and that their life feels more fulfilled as a result of social media becoming sort of the main way in which we understand the world around us. Um, I mean, the fact that attention, our eyeballs, have become commoditized is, I mean, that has to be the most inhuman thing imaginable, right? Like, this isn't like a capitalism versus Marxism thing, right? I mean, it's like this is just like a fundamental like human values thing. Like the fact that our attention now is a multi-trillion-dollar industry should be something that like makes, I don't care what the fuck your politics are. If it, like, I mean, obviously people in Silicon Valley seem to think the attention economy is like a good thing to be exploited for, better algorithms and better products to be sold into. Um, but we this is the thing. This is the thing. Like we get to decide. We get to decide. We are the owners of our values. We are the owners of our society collectively, our republic through our self government, our self rule. And I do think that like this needs to increasingly become part of the conversation. I mean, and it's hard, right, too, because like this is like how you politic now, right? This is how politicians get noticed. This is like is by posting on social media. So how do we escape from this death spiral that we're in? Um, where this attention economy that is extractive. It's extractive not just of financially. It is extractive financially, but it's also extractive of our basic like human dignity. I mean, the side effect is that like we've lost our ability to um, operate in common cause with our citizens. Like we've lost our ability to um, you know cooperate across difference. A fundamental like a fundamental thing which is necessary for a healthy democratic polity, for the democratic game to be, you know, participated in with good sportsmanship. That like when you lose an election, you congratulate your opponent and you take lessons from that moment, and you you run again next time, maybe with a better message. Like that's how it's supposed to work. You're supposed to respect the decision of the body politic. We're not there anymore. We're there now where we have a minority of the population that is trying really, really hard to come up with insane legal constitutional theories and political tactics in order to entrench a permanent rule um, of a minority over the majority. That we have a minority in this country that lives inside of of an epistemic bubble, that is convinced that it is under siege by uh, liberal, like by liberal culture, that has captured cultural institutions and political institutions and institutions of the government, and that their way of life is about to be destroyed if they don't find a way to entrench permanent power, and to fight back, and to impose sort of their view of sort of what they might characterize as traditional social hierarchies and traditional values back on society, um, at the end of a gun. I mean that is like where we are. Um, I mean, so I mean, one of the things, I mean, one of the things that needs to happen, I think, is we do need to find ways to like to have like, if you are like a liberal or a progressive, you do need to find ways to start thinking about um, addressing that population in a way that removes that fear. Not that that should be your responsibility, not minimizing the fact that uh, the propaganda apparatus that those people live in, that the epistemic bubble that they live in, is brainwashing them. But there will come a time, and I mean, Donald Trump is of advanced age. His health is not good. There will come a time when Donald Trump is no longer part of the picture. Um, that's just that's just nature. Um, and there's going to be opportunities there to try and like speak into that chaos and speak into that vacuum, and get people to realize that um, that losing an election doesn't mean that like it's the end of their way of life. There has to be a way, some counter propaganda that can break through that fear that drives a lot of the radicalism on the right. Um, and this goes back to like what we talked about at the top, right? Which is that if we're going to win, if we're going to succeed at preserving our democracy, preserving our republic, we have to practice the politics of addition and thinking about things that way. None of this minimizes in any way, and I spend a lot of time, giving my own moral analysis on the right, which is harsh, appropriately. But then there's the conversation about politics and political tactics and how to think about that and think about what's effective. And we have to be able to practice the politics of addition if we're going to win. And we must, because as I said in my piece, uh, we owe it to those who came before us that sacrificed greatly such that we could be here and have our freedoms. And we owe it to our posterity, because I think that we should leave the world better than we found it. So that's the mindset shift that I think the Democratic opposition needs to find its way towards. And I'm happy to see someone like, especially someone like James Tellerico in Texas, is, I think, models and exemplifies that. But we need more. We need 10 more people, 10 more major leaders like that across the country. That's how we win. So anyways, that's my monologue, I guess. I guess I can look to see if there's any questions or comments that I can respond to. Let's see what people have said. Julius Guzman says, most unfortunately, don't think this way and rather keep receipts. I was convinced many years ago that noisy newsfeed models as the default state need to go away for that and many other reasons. We need to start with the individual. Mark St. Pierre says, agree with your sentiments and can clearly understand why some people must unplug. For some, it may seem like a luxury to be informed. It's obvious. It's obviously the Republicans. What else have people said? Mark St. Pierre also said, are attempting to employ the Kirk shooting this way. Only the ignorant will swallow the hypocrisy and gaslighting. I mean, it remains to be seen what the effect of the Kirk shooting is going to have. I mean, it seems like it feels like a significant inflection point. I don't like I'm actually kind of a little bit more hopeful than I was like a few days ago, even though I'm really, really worried about sort of the sort of increasing cultural political violence. That it does seem like I don't like it does I don't think that it's having the effect that a lot on the radical right think it's having. Like, I think I've seen some commentators on the right kind of feel like this is sort of that the Kirk shooting is driving a lot of moderates into the Trump camp. I don't think that's really happening. Although I am worried about that. American Perk Walk says, how do we counter the fire hose of disinformation coming from the right? Well, I think like one of the things that's like really important to understand is that like many people, a lot of people, in fact, maybe like the most important segment of people in American society today are actually not that plugged in at all. That there are people who are not politically activated. That there's a group of Americans that make up a, a lot of them registered as independents, and they're the kinds of people that like really don't pay attention to politics outside of election season. There's a kind of a group of people that really just kind of like tune politics out, and then like maybe like in the 3 months before November in an election year, they start paying a little bit more attention to try and figure out who they should vote for. That's actually like where all of the real opportunity exists. Um, so like allowing yourself to sort of think about like how do you break through to these hyper political engaged people who are on X every day, or on Truth Social every day, and like politics is their whole life. It's their identity. They have like, they drive pickup trucks around with Trump flags on them. Like these people are just like, I mean, these are not, they're not, you shouldn't consider these people persuadable. You should also take solace in the fact that they don't like represent like, you know, a sufficiently large percentage of the population that like you need to be able to persuade them. There's a lot of people out there, and you see this, and Trump kind of demonstrated this in 2016 and 2020, right? And Bernie Sanders demonstrates this as well. There are a group of people out there that will come out and vote if a populist is on the ballot. That somebody who seems to sort of like be speaking for them rather than sort of defending the status quo. There's a group of people who will activate. There's I watched a video on the channel like More Perfect Union recently where Bernie Sanders like went into West Virginia, and it's kind of interesting. Like a lot of MAGA rural people love Bernie Sanders. There's a lot of Trump voters in rural America that said if it was Trump versus Bernie, they'd switch to Bernie, but they would never vote for Kamala Harris. They would never vote for, you know, and I think that a lot of people, I think that the Democratic Party, like establishment, like just simply is not paying close enough attention to like why that is. Um, a lot of like rural voters, simply like they simply just do not trust this like political elite that they feel speaks down to them, that tells them to trust the experts, that it's like basically just like says like trust us to take care of this. um and I think this is where I think a lot of centrists are going to have to uh you know navel gaze a little bit and realize that there are people out there, there are a lot of MAGA voters out there that would vote for a populist left candidate if they were on the ballot. Um, and that's something that Steve Bannon understands. Steve Bannon, as evil as I think his politics is, I think he understands this dynamic perfectly. Um, and because, like, the reality is that, like, Trump, like, guys, like, Trump won a majority of the poor vote. Like, I think there was like a poll that showed 57% of people on Medicaid. This is poor people who can't afford their own health, like, health insurance. And so they get it from the government because they qualify because because of their income level. Nearly 60% of those people voted for Donald Trump. And a lot of them would have voted for Bernie Sanders over Donald Trump. Um, and if you, and it's like, we know why. It's not a mystery as to why that is. It's because they think that the Democratic establishment represents the sort of kind of people who go to Harvard and live in New York City and LA and work in big corporations. And they think that Donald Trump pretends, he's a con man, but like to that, like he claims to be standing against those people, and that gets them up to vote for them, even though they're kind of voting against their own interest, as demonstrated by the big beautiful bill, which like significantly cut Medicaid and is going to kick a lot of these people off their health insurance. So that's something that, I mean, this is the opportunity. Like that's how Democrats can win in a landslide, is if they can thread that needle. um, if they can reach those people with a candidate who um, they perceive as standing against that same group of people while holding enough of the center. Uh, and that's different. I mean, like we talked earlier about how, I know have some centrist friends in New York who are very anti-Trump, but like, are flirting with the idea that like Trump might be the lesser evil if Mamdani becomes mayor. And so there is, but I do think that there's more potential um, to activate the working class in greater numbers than that group of people to be lost. And a lot of those people might just like make peace with fascism because, they're concerned with being able to afford their next yacht. And I mean, that is what it is. So that's the opportunity as far as I'm concerned. So I think that's gonna be it for me today. I mean, we went for an hour. Um, Talked about some stuff. I'll try to do more of these. I got really really bad. I think I was doing them pretty regularly, like like months ago, and then I kind of went on a Substack live sabbatical. But I'll try to do more of these things. I hope people like them. And want everyone to know that that there's always hope, right? And that fear is the enemy. So stay brave. Believe that a better future is possible because it is. And I hope I've at least given people some things to think about. So thank you, everybody, and talk later.